you here. In my room, I want you here. Now we're gonna be face to face. And I lay right down in my favorite place. And now I wanna be your dog. And now I wanna be your dog. And now I wanna be your dog. Well, come on. Now I'm ready to close my eyes. And now I'm ready to close my mind. And now I'm ready to feel your hand. And lose my heart on the burning sands. And now I wanna be your dog. And now I wanna be your dog. And now I wanna be your dog. Well, come on.
You just heard I Want to Be Your Dog from the Stooges. This is a Rock Metal Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And that was actually the alternative vocal version, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in a moment. This is actually this is a really great opportunity that we have tonight, Mark, because we're being joined once again by a special guest. That we're starting to get more and more special guests, and he's joined us many moons back for the MC5 show, which I think was
or so ago, I think.
Maybe even longer. I think it was episode like 83 or something like that, the MC5.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
So we'd like to welcome Mike Johnston.
Greetings. How you guys doing?
Good. And Mike, we've obviously, for longtime Requiem listeners, we've made a lot of references to the job that Mark and I had working at a record store.
That shaped our lives.
Yeah, it was definitely a philosophical zone of talking about culture and music and life and all kinds of things. And Mike was our manager and philosophical guru, if you will, and also kind of one of the guys that I think turned, especially me and I would say probably you, onto a lot of the garage rock stuff and a lot of the Michigan rock, late 60s punk rock kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so we've brought Mike in once again because he's a bit of an expert in this area. So I guess, tell the people maybe that didn't hear the MC5 show just a little bit about, maybe how you got involved in the Detroit garage rock
lived
scene.
Through it.
Yeah, I was into it. Yeah. I was young and in school, and I grew up in Traverse City, Michigan. Wasn't really the mecca for Michigan rock, but at those times, back in the late 60s, early 70s, almost every Michigan rock band appeared in Traverse City more than once, usually. I saw Bob Seger at a teen dance in 8th grade, doing war protest songs. So, I mean, it was different than it is now. And music was everywhere. The Stooges never played in Traverse City, so I didn't see them early on. I didn't see them till like a reformed version of them many years later. The MC5 came to Traverse City, and they had a reputation like the Stooges, and they were down on the beach, and they got arrested for trespassing, which probably wasn't the case, put in jail so they couldn't do their performance, and they didn't play.
Probably targeted.
Exactly, yeah. And so, I mean, the music was pretty volatile. MC5 were more political, but the Stooges were rowdier, and, all the, kind of escalated from there. And so, I was into, rock and roll and blues, and, by the time the Stooges and, MC5 started to record, I'd been listening to the Yardbirds and those kind of bands, and I was into Led Zeppelin and everything. But the Michigan rock was edgier, and it was different, and that's kind of what it's known for, and it's kind of why a lot of people don't know about Michigan rock, don't know about it because it was a little bit too off the hook, for the time that it came out. So.
And a song like we just heard, tell us, I guess, a little bit about the importance of a song like "I Want to Be Your Dog," and maybe I guess the sound of the Stooges and how it fits into most of the stuff that we do is on the heavier spectrum, right. And the Stooges obviously play a role just as MC5 Definitely. Did in that. So I mean, what did you?
Well, the context is Woodstock, 1969. And peace and love, and kind of folk rock. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young emerged there. Santana with kind of that Latin rock,
country rock scene with the Byrds,
right? And they started evolving to that. Bob Dylan was doing Nashville Skyline, which is sort of a country,
Johnny Cash, on there,
segment and everything. And so I'd say that the sound of the music was kind of getting softer, not harder. Hendrix was, taking it another path, and then Led Zeppelin came along in that time frame. Also, we're kind of taking another path. But the Michigan rock music, it was really unique. It was really different. It was uncompromising. It was loud. It was noisy. It was in your face, and it really, really stood out. I actually remember buying the first Stooges record. I had been actually kicked out of a record store in Traverse City. They didn't like me ordering all this weird music. And so I went into a Woolworths.
Communist.
Yeah. I went into a Woolworths, which was the only place I could buy music, and this Stooges album was sitting there. And I thought, these guys look cool. And I'd heard of them, but I had no clue what they sounded like.
Plus the cover looked like the first Doors cover.
Right, yeah, same photographer. And but so I bought it. I just bought it and sight, unheard. And it was one of the, great buys. And I loved it. I just immediately loved the record, and bought their next couple albums. And then it was kind of weird for me because I went through a phase a little bit later where they seemed so punk and juvenile, which is kind of what they're known for. And it sort of seemed like after they broke up and all the problems happened, like I kind of just set it on the back shelf, and then I rediscovered it. When punk rock came around, and I kind of felt like it was more vital than most of the punk rock bands, and I kind of started to see, as I got older, the brilliance of what they were doing. It sort of really struck me, later on. And so
and Iggy was kind of, there's this claim that the first time they used the word punk was to sort of describe him and his actions on stage and stuff, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
The crowd and everything else, And
I know for Iggy, and I don't want to get too much into this yet, but because we can get into it when we talk about the audience response a little bit later. But he was really influenced by like Jim Morrison's stage performance when he saw the Doors. I know John Sinclair has talked about that as well. That they were both blown away by how Morrison acted with the crowd and the theater of the absurd and some of the stuff that was going on there.
And the Stooges, and like the MC5, they would take something and then just try to take it to another level, outdo it, be noisier, be rowdier, be more of whatever. Mm-hmm. I mean, you take all those front men like Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and I'm spacing out here, the Mick Jagger.
Mick Jagger,
people, sure. In retrospect, Iggy, pushed it farther than anybody.
Yeah, for sure.
So they were really, everything was just sort of hyped, really.
And I know what always got me, with a song like we just heard, "I Want to Be Your Dog," is the sort of the propulsive, just almost the. And I know Iggy talked about being influenced by hearing like the Detroit machinery and the factory sounds and that sort of just that pounding, stamping sound. Yeah. And you hear it, and "I Want to Be Your Dog," that percussion is just incessant.
And then, the lyrics are really simple, but they're kind of genius too, where it's like, again, in the late 60s, it was an idealistic political time where young people really felt like everything was going to change, and they were going to rule the world, and Woodstock Nation was going to rise, and there were going to be changes taking place that were in the culture, and the Stooges were kind of already bailed out. You know, they in retrospect, again, they had their finger on the real pulse of where it was going. It wasn't going in this idealistic direction at all, and so, you know, songs like, you know, we don't care, we don't give a shit, you know. I mean, that's kind of was the attitude that really started to creep in later, and they were, you know, ahead of the curve on that in a really big way. But it was not typical of, you know, like a Joni Mitchell writing a song about, you know, we're stardust, we're golden, you know, we're children of the sun, you know, all that. You know, it was a totally different direction.
This is like kind of a counter to all the West Coast kind of peace and love, feel good, you know.
Yeah, and it was seen that way by the West Coast bands. Kind of didn't like the Michigan sound, and the Michigan bands kind of didn't like the, you know, I mean, in a general sense, it was very true. They did, you know, that stuff was seen as soft.
Did they find an audience with some of the New York scene because of the Velvet Underground and some of the? I mean, Velvet Underground didn't have much of an audience to begin with, really, anyways. But
I think it was sort of true for them too. I don't, you know, people were. I think they were fascinated by the Stooges. My cousin saw them tons of times, and I talked with her about it, and she said most of the concerts she went to, people would be lined up along the perimeter of the wall. Nobody wanted to get close to the stage because they didn't want to have any kind of confrontation. Because that would be exactly what would happen. And later, you know, when people got angrier and it started to get more and more aggressive. But she said most of the time, like in the late 60s, early 70s, all the crowd would be just jammed as far as, well, everybody wanted to see it, but they didn't want to be singled. They didn't want to be singled out by Iggy. They didn't want to, you know, and you know, anybody that would kind of step up and be seen out of that would be a target for the Stooges, and so it was really, you know, she said a lot of concerts were like that. It was just, everybody's kind of watching it like a freak show almost. And
they were kind of nihilistic before it was the in thing to do, which, you know, like you said, they took it, predicted what the 70s was going to be about, which was really this sort of dropout, kind of like, we fucking lost, like Vietnam's still going on, like let's just burn out. And, you know, I mean, they kind of had that magical, well, if you call it magical, but the atmosphere sort of captured on some of this stuff, you know.
They were, you know, they were disenchanted by everything, and before anybody else was.
Yeah, and when we get into part two, the song in particular that we'll probably clue in on a little bit lyrically is like a song like Search and Destroy, about just, I mean, you know, and I don't want to get into it yet, but and Mike, you kind of got some things together for this show that were kind of a nice surprise for Mark and I. You had gone through and you've actually met and interviewed some of these guys, and we're going to be hearing some of this stuff tonight. Tell us a little bit about some of the interview clips that we're going to be hearing.
Well, the big one that I have is I interviewed Ron Asheton in 1993. I was doing a series for Michigan Public Radio on the history of Michigan rock, and I interviewed a ton of people, and Ron Asheton was one of the people I interviewed. And you know, asked him. He was very, you know, into talking about everything, and which isn't always the case with a lot of people. So there's some really good clips here, and I used real small segments on my radio program of his. You know, maybe 30 seconds total, 50 seconds.
Because a lot of them you had to edit. You know, he's pretty raw and unfiltered. You know?
Drug use and language, and you know, and there wasn't a lot of room for a lot of discussion on the program that I was putting together. So I had all this stuff, and I just dug it out, and this is the first time I haven't, you know, that this has kind of got out there. So it should be fun for Stooges fans to hear this. So
cool,
yeah, for sure.
So let's hear Asheton talking about where the band actually came up with its name and some of the origins, and then we'll come back and chat about some other things here in a second.
So basically, we got our house at Forest Court, and we were rehearsing, and one night it was time to come up with a band name. So we're sitting around, and excuse this, but we dropped a little LSD, and we were having some passing a joint around, trying to think of a name. And I said, hey, you know, I've always been a big fan of the Three Stooges. So I'm going, you know, our life is kind of like the Three Stooges, because we were the only guys in town just about with long hair, and we'd go downtown, get kicked out of restaurants. College guys would try to run us over in their cars. They'd actually throw full cans of beer at us as we're walking in the streets. Lots of trouble. Cops stopping us all the time just because of the way we looked. And I'm going, yeah, but it's okay. We're like the Three Stooges, but let's call ourselves the Psychedelic Stooges. And, of course, everyone went, yes, that's it, man. And we went under the Psychedelic Stooges until we signed with Elektra. They asked us to drop the Psychedelic, so that was fine. And also, they had to clear the name the Stooges with the Three Stooges. So when we were in New York City, they actually called up the Three Stooges lawyer, and I got to hear on the conference phone Mo Howard and his lawyer say, well, as long as they don't call it the Three Stooges, I'm like, yeah, right, we're going to call it the Three Stooges. So that was really neat. And back then we wanted to be real experimental. That was one thing that's cool. We weren't that accomplished on our instruments, so we would, I would be doing some sort of drone melody type effects thing with my bass guitar. I'd use the bass with like a fuzz tone and a wah pedal, and my brother had kind of a homemade drum set. It was two 50-gallon oil drums with contact mics, and he had a set of timbales and a snare drum. I don't think he had any cymbals, and we just attached like hammers or some sort of mallets to the 50-gallon oil drums, and of course after 5-10 minutes they'd always break down. And then we had things like a lap slide guitar. Sometimes Iggy would play just an open tune, mostly just for the droning type sitar effect. And we would make up other instruments, like we'd start out a show with taking a blender, just a food blender, putting a little water in it, and sticking a microphone down in it, and just turning it on and having that on low and having that sound of churning water go on for like 10-15 minutes before we played. And imagine that amplified through a really big PA. People be going, what the hell? What's going on? And it really, kind of set people up for the Crazy Stooges show, because was mostly antics and high energy, kind of short jams. I think our first job was the first show we played was 15, 20 minutes long. And we had other instruments, like when we lived on the farm, we found this old, megaphone, and it's a pretty big size, maybe about 4.5 feet high. And we found that same thing, if you put a contact mic in a stand, you can, as you lift the frontal up and down, it'll make different feedbacks. So it's pretty interesting sound, like this weird. And so we play with that for a bit, and then it'd be on. Then all this would probably go on in one show. Then it'd be, okay, it's washboard time. And what it was, just a regular scrubbing washboard. We were really fond of contact mics. Contact mic to the washboard. Then we'd get Iggy put on a pair of golf shoes with spikes, and then you get on the contact mic and sort of do a rhythmic shuffle, And imagine that coming through, which is pretty, an amplifier where the contact mic would be connected to some amplifier. So we'd get we were really original. We were getting some original strange sounds. And then along with just the complete antics of the band on stage, I remember the very first show at the Grandy Ballroom, Iggy had gotten, he made himself, back then it's when Clapton and Hendrix, when the big permed hair was the thing, and Eric Clapton probably was the king of the white men for the permed hair, because when he finally let it started falling down, it was just those big ringlets. Same thing, somebody's beeping in on the beep.
That's cool.
So Dave and I had permed our hair, so we had Hendrix hair for a while. Unfortunately, I don't have any good pictures. But so Iggy, he made himself a big ringlet wig out of tinfoil. Just took tinfoil and corkscrewed it and just put it in some sort of mesh on his head. Painted his face white and wore like a turn of the century's nightgown, one of those white things that go from the neck to the toes. And we're driving to Detroit, Dave and myself with wild permed hair, and Iggy like this, and this car full of hoodlums pulls up and passes us, and they do like a double take, and we were smoking a joint at the time too. They literally stopped and cruised alongside of us. They spent about 20 minutes trying to run us off the road. They literally wanted to kill us. That's how enraged they were. And then when we got to the Grandy, it was the same. The parking attendant man, he says, "Man, what is it? Is that some kind of machine?" With this old black dude with a flashlight. He thought it was the funniest thing. So we were like the big novelty hit at the Grandy. We became house regulars. One other time, we hauled up one of those 250-gallon oil containers that you find behind a house to heat people who have oil-heating houses. We got 10 guys we bought it for like $50. 10 guys to drag it upstairs, put it in front of the stage of the Grandy. It wouldn't even fit on the stage. That afternoon, painted it white, and then just painted it psychedelic with all sorts of Dago paint, just splashing it on and making weird things. And then same, stuck a microphone right down inside the hole, and we had different people play it with hammers. So it stayed at the Grandy for like almost a year. It became a fixture, people sitting on it, until I guess people started abusing it and taking advantage of getting up on it. When they started having bigger bands, so the big national acts come in, they had to get rid of it.
So there's some pretty great stories that, Asheton has, and talking about some of the uniqueness of the Stooges and some of playing with the primitive instruments and things like that. That
Noise.
I think, it gave them a sense of a reputation right away, right? That they were this, utterly raw band that you were going to be confronted with when you saw them.
I think the MC5 were very political, and they were really loud, and they kind of had a level of virtuosity on their instruments, if you will. And the Stooges were they had the same kind of energy and rawness, but there was nothing shiny or pretentious about them at all. I mean, the MC5, you can kind of look at them and see some pretension there for sure. And the Stooges, I think that's the beauty of their band to this day. I remember seeing Emerson, Lake and Palmer right around that time, and that may be the most pretentious music I've ever seen in my life. It was horrid. I mean, like I was into them. I walked away from it. I got rid of the records. It was just like, God, it was sick. So the Stooges are so refreshing in that sense. They didn't really care about what you thought about them. They weren't acting like they were like these rock gods or anything like that. And it was refreshing. It was honest. It was high energy, and they were defiant and possessed with what they were doing, and it was really, really powerful.
And I know, Lester Bangs talks about that in Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung, that really neat chapter on Iggy, and he talks about, how Iggy wanted to sort of demystify the idea of the rock god with the whole pie-throwing kind of metaphors and stuff like that. I mean, where did that come from Iggy? I mean, what do you think sparked it? Maybe not just Iggy, but the whole band. Why? What do you think nurtured that sort of, we don't give a fuck, we don't care if we suck, we don't care what you think about us,
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I can really honestly give an answer to that, but I think that they were into really good music. They listened to really good jazz players, they listened to really good blues players. They were influenced by good music, and I think that they were together enough that they saw that this honest presentation had more vitality than anything else. Just be honest. Don't. And I think that if there's something that I see about the Michigan style and sound of rock music that I still like to this day is probably the least pretentious music scene of rock music that's ever happened, and it is refreshing for that reason. And Michigan's kind of a blue collar, grind it out, speak your mind place, and they I think they did that. I think the music is like that. I think the lyrics are like that. It was I think they really weren't aspiring to some artistic achievement or something. I think they were on some level too, but I think that what they were really concerned about giving somebody something real, something honest. Right.
Yeah, that's cool. So I guess where we want to get into is, we started the show off obviously with a song from an alternative version from their their debut record, the self-titled Stooges. I know we're going to hear an interview clip where Asheton reflects on that first record, but is there, anything else to sort of introduce this to the audience?
Well, John Cale produced the record, and he was in the Velvet Underground. He was kind of a esoteric art music guy, and it was probably good that he produced the first album, because I think the first album is really, really simple, but there's this depth to the record, and I think his touch on that may have helped while they were still in this really early developing stage. I mean, that's just kind of my opinion on that. And I think one other thing to maybe mention before we get into this is, Iggy is probably to this day one of the wildest stage acts that there's ever been, and he's sort of like this unbridled energy, and he was just right in people's faces, and I think they really tried to capture that sound on their records. That meant a lot to them. The MC5 were all about being live. It wasn't about, again, in contrast, you take Sgt. Pepper's and Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys and Pink Floyd and these bands that were evolving, and it was all, these bands that were doing all this layers of studio stuff. And the Stooges in the MC5 and the Michigan bands, it was all like, that's crap. We're just going to
cut right to the energy.
It's about, people, it's about music, it's about sound. And another thing I think is important, we've got this stuff with Ron Asheton. I think that Iggy has always kind of stayed in the limelight, and the rest of the Stooges get overlooked. And in my opinion, Iggy's made great music throughout his career, but the Stooges stuff is more vital, and I think it's because of the members that he played with.
Sure.
I think Ron Asheton is one of the really great rock guitar noise players from the early generation, and I think that
he's not really talked about in circles when if you talk about the Stooges, it's Iggy or
they were a band, and I think when the band broke up, you can see when Bowie came in that influence.
Iggy went with Lou Reed,
which
and
I think kind of sucks myself. I mean, Bowie's kind of cool for what he is, but it wasn't what the Stooges were about. And I think people that really liked the Stooges felt like it interfered with them, and so, but Asheton never changed. He Dark Carnival and the bands he did later were the same. I mean, he was always putting out that sound and that style. New Race, New Order, the different groups he was in. Were really, this was a rock sound that was in the Stooges that continued, and Iggy kind of veered away from that and then came back to it later. I think he realized that it was a good sound.
Yeah.
But I think he got away from it.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think the Asheton brothers and are vital to the band.
Well, and I guess we should mention, obviously Iggy Pop on vocals, talking about Ron Asheton on guitar, Scott on drums, and then Dave Alexander. Where's he fit in? I mean, his name's never really dropped.
Yeah, no, I mean, because he died really young. I think he died before they put out Raw Power, overdosed. And but he was, Ron will talk about him in some of these clips coming up, but he was kind of, introverted, kind of maybe like Fred Sonic Smith was in the MC5. Deeper guy, quiet, meditative, and so that kind of mystical, undercurrent to some of their music. It kind of was influenced by him. And then when he died, Ron played bass and Williamson played guitar.
And then we get James Williamson. So.
And Ron didn't dig being the bass player too much either.
I was going to say,
But that's another story for later down the road here. So.
Well, let's hear Ron talking about this first Stooges record, and then we'll come back and then introduce some things and actually get into some tunes here.
Okay, basically, we had played a show at the Michigan Union Ballroom with the MC5 and the Up, and we got done playing, and we walked in the dressing room, and here was this guy wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket, and he goes, "Hey, how would you guys like to be stars?" And so we're going, "Yeah, sure, get him out of here, who is this guy?" And it turns out it's Danny Fields. He had discovered the Five, so to speak, and told Elektra, "Hey, you got to sign these guys." So he liked the Stooges, and we can thank Danny Fields for really going back to New York, telling Jack Holtzman, who owned Elektra Records, just take my word for it, sign these guys. It's probably the best deal they ever got for the measly amount of money they put in and gave us, and the records still sell.
Right.
They're still really making money 25 years later. So we basically signed, and we played a job here in Ann Arbor. Holtzman came and saw the band, brought the contracts. I think there is a picture somewhere of all of us at the Trans Love House, all the Stooges people, all the MC5 people, all their organization. And with Jack Holtzman at the night we signed the signing party. So basically, John Cale from the Velvet Underground, they didn't know what to do with us, but but he had just signed on with Elektra as a staff producer. So fortunately, being Velvet Underground, that worked. He knew he was the obvious choice for us. And it worked out fine. We became good friends. It was our first time in the studio, and of course we had our giant Marshall stacks. We wanted, our idea of course, the only way we could play is blisteringly loud. So we wanted our Marshalls, like we play them on stage, on 10. So John goes, no, you can't do that, man. So we actually, Stooges had a sit-down strike at the studio, and we would not work. We sat, literally, it took an hour. We just sat around in one of the sound booths and smoked hash, and while he was yelling at us, and finally we compromised. Instead of Marshalls on 10, Marshalls on 9. So that was our compromise, and it turned out well. We had, before that, we weren't really, before the first Stooges album, we weren't really doing songs. We were doing more like high-energy jams with what we call freakouts at the end, where you might just jam on a riff for 5 minutes and then just take it to some energy jazz type John Coltrane power freakout. And for the Stooges' first album, we actually sat down and came up with those tunes. So that was our first time in the studio, and those were basically our first tunes. I remember they listened to what we had. Holtzman was real happy. He goes, yeah, but you're a little bit short. You need 3 songs. You've got some more material, right? Oh, yeah, no problem, man. So I literally locked myself in the Chelsea Hotel in my room and came up with Little Doll, Not Right, and Real Cool Time, all within about 1 hour. They had to be quick. They had to be simple. So Iggy comes down. Here they are. He whips up some words, and we go back in the studio and do them. We just learned them. We rehearsed them like one time. They went in the studio and did each song in one take, and that was it.
Cool. And so obviously this first record, I think the first time I heard it, I don't know how you felt. Like I had heard, I think, Raw Power, and then I went back and got the first record, and I don't want to say I was underwhelmed, but there was like a lot of subtleties to it. It wasn't as like aggressive as maybe I expected it to be. But through the years, there's these sort of rare moments, like on I Want to Be Your Dog, where Iggy like snarls that "come on" finally, like about halfway through the song, and you're like, whoa, there's some like unbridled energy that, and I don't know if it's that Cal was able to like contain that and then release it at the right moments or what, but
figure out how to actually record them where they don't feel like they're being recorded. They can just do what they do.
Yeah.
I heard that record first, and I got it when it came out. So
it's a different context,
right? And I sort of grew along with them. Yeah. But when again in the context, I think it was pretty off the wall. That Mick Jagger wasn't as spontaneous, and you could just hear it. It was just. It was a lot more I don't care, in it, and it rang true for a lot of people, I think.
And we've got a reflection coming up here from another Michigan rock guy, a guy that maybe doesn't get the accolades as much or talked about in the same context as like MC5 and the Stooges, but Scott Morgan's kind of a key guy playing with Sonic's Rendezvous and Rationals. Yeah, that's right. He was in the Rationals.
Kind of more of a Motown vibe into his music too.
The label that was put on him in Michigan back in the 60s was blonde hair, blue eyed soul singer.
Okay.
And that's kind of what he was. Aretha Franklin, and he was into all the Motown stuff, and he's a real good vocalist, a real passionate singer. The Rationals signed with Capitol Records, like Bob Seger did in SRC. That was a label the Beatles were on.
Yeah.
And so those were the bands that everybody thought were going to be, mammoth.
Yeah.
And the Rationals had a couple of songs that were really big in Michigan that, people thought were going to catch on, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And it just, they didn't have a really good manager at the time, and, I think that played into it. And that can really be a downfall for a band sometime. And it just didn't happen for them for whatever reason. But
in retrospect, going back to listen to stuff, I don't know why it wasn't bigger than it was.
I don't either. And again, same. I think really the political overtones that were set up by the MC5, the Stooges. By the time '69 came along, the Michigan bands were not allowed to play at Woodstock because they were fearful of all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think all these other bands got lumped in with that. Bob Seger was singing war protest songs, and the Rationals weren't. But they were hanging out with these bands. They lived in Ann Arbor, and the MC5 moved there. The Stooges were in Ann Arbor, and by that time, '69, that's where all these bands were in Michigan, and the Rationals were from there, and they were part of the scene. I just saw that MC5 movie the other day, and I was noticing there was a clip where Fred Sonic Smith was signing an autograph for somebody in Buffalo, and Scott Morgan was standing next to him, and so he was around all that stuff. He was involved in it. So
he's kind of become alongside maybe Wayne Kramer, kind of like a today spokesperson for Detroit rock kind of stuff,
which is good. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate he never really kind of stepped out front as much as he probably should have had the opportunity to be.
I saw him about 2 years ago in Ann Arbor, and just as vital. He's done stuff with Nicky Anderson from Entombed and Helicopters as well.
Yeah, and he's done stuff with Dennis Tech from Birdman and stuff.
Yeah, he's
and so we're going to hear...
Nice guy, too.
Yeah, yeah, he seems like a really super cool guy. We're going to hear a kind of an interview clip from him, and then we're going to get into some music. 1969, No Fun, We Will Fall. Why would you say these would be maybe, I guess, vital tunes off that first record, and what should people be maybe listening for?
Yeah, I think with 1969, I mean, that was the year that, they title a song after the year that they put it out. It was almost like a play-by-play, their personal take on 1969. The second album, they do a song called 1970. And it was sort of like, almost like you can follow their progression, through the, it's sort of like a statement. Again, not other bands weren't thinking like that. It was very unique. And just, the feel of the piece, No Fun is really kind
of became a punk rock anthem, because a lot of punk bands did a cover of No Fun,
Yeah, and again, just like sort of the youthful, just be the bummer, of life, just kind of confronting that. Again, not going in an idealistic direction, but
yeah, and then
we've all been there,
Sure.
You think everything should be cool, but it doesn't feel good, so.
And then that's going to sort of blend into We Will Fall, which is, I guess, more of on the experimental droning side, and Ashton's going to chat about that before we hear it. And then I guess when we come back, we can maybe talk a little bit about We Will Fall.
And I should mention real quick that the Scott Morgan clip was recorded in 1993 also, the same year I did the...
Oh, the Ashton stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, well, enjoy Scott Morgan reflecting on the Stooges, 1969, No Fun, and then We Will Fall.
The Stooges is like something new. Like obviously they started out live. And their live shows were like performance art. That Scott Asheton was playing drums made out of oil drums. It was just like a thrown together kit. Iggy was like playing a vacuum cleaner into the microphone and that sort of thing, and it was like early performance art that may have been in existence somewhere else, but I wasn't aware of it. So it was something new for me, and the music itself was extremely raw, taking what the MC5 were doing again and taking it to a new level, even more raw, even more just feedback and noise, and that's why it's like heavily influential on a lot of the bands, like in Seattle and in probably New York noise scene.
Somehow the noise from those groups is more appealing than the noise from some of these other groups. I mean, do you think it's more musical somehow, or
which groups are you talking about?
The Stooges and MC5.
It's primal.
Yeah, right.
It was
more direct in a sense.
Yeah, probably less contrived to. I shouldn't say that, but it is more direct. It was the first go around for this stuff, and I think it was the beginning. They say, Dave Marsh says that the MC5 and the Stooges were the beginning of a lot of different kinds of music, like hard rock, heavy metal, grunge, the whole thing. They were at the beginning of that whole thing. I'm sure there's other bands that could include in that. From
All right. 1969, okay. Walk across the USA. It's another year for me and you. Another year with nothing to do. It's another year for me and you. Another year with nothing to do. Now last year I was 21. I didn't have a lot of fun. And now I'm gonna be 22. I say oh my and a boo-hoo. Yeah, now I'm gonna be 22. Oh my and a boo-hoo. Well, it's 1969, okay. All across the USA. It's another year for me and you. Another year with nothing to do. And it's 1969. And it's 1969. And it's 1969, baby. It's 1969, baby. It's 1969. It's 1969. It's 1969. It's 1969. It's 1969, baby. Another day. No fun with my babe. No fun. No fun with my babe. No fun. No fun to be alone. walking by myself. No fun to be alone, but in love with nobody else. Well, maybe go out, or maybe stay home, or maybe call mom on the telephone. Well, come on. 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 For no fun to be alone. For no fun to be alone. Hang on, don't you let me go. No fun to be alone. I said to be alone. I said to be alone. No fun. When I say come on, Ryder, I say come on, Ryder. I say come on, Ryder, let me. I say come on, Ryder, let me hear you tell him. Let me tell him why. 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 Tell him why I feel. I say come on, let me hear you tell him. Tell him how I feel. Yeah. 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 It's one of those songs that you either love it or hate it. There's kind of no in between. And basically we will follow that chant, Om Shri Ram Ja Ram Ja Ja Ram. It's something Dave Alexander found because he was sort of like the George Harrison mystic of our band. He was way into that kind of stuff. And you're supposed to chant it and it's supposed to make you high. And it actually does work because when we were doing it in the studio, it wasn't really intended to be that long. We basically did the chant first and kind of added stuff over it, pieced it together. And the chant is what started it out. And I remember John Cale, unbeknownst to us at that time, when you're in the studio and the engineer starts flickering your headphones, it means cut, stop. I thought, gee, my phones are cutting out. But we were so into our chant that he had to finally come in and go, stop, it's too long. But then he wound up playing on it. He got into the groove. It's one of those things you kind of get hypnotized into. night. I hold myself tight. I won't fight. I won't fight. Then I whisper to me, then I whisper to me, then I'll lay right down, and I'll lay right down, on my back, on my bed, in my hotel, and I'll be in love. Wake all night. All night. All night. And in the morning, I'll be ready to see you. To see you. Don't forget to come. Room 121. Don't forget to come. I'll be shaking, I'll be trembling, I'll be happy, I'll be weak,
That was We Will Fall, No Fun, 1969. And we had a couple of cool interview clips in there, one from Scott Morgan and then one from Mr. Asheton. So tell us a little bit, I mean, here you get like these driving sort of raw songs like 69, No Fun, I Want to Be Your Dog, and then all of a sudden you get this totally, this 10-minute long droney kind of tune. I mean, where was some of that stuff coming from for these guys?
I think, I think one of the cool things about the Michigan rock bands, I'm talking MC5 and Stooges in particular, they listened to John Sinclair, turned them on to a lot of different kinds of music, from free jazz to Ravi Shankar, and they were taking that music pretty seriously, in a different way than, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones are kind of famous for integrating sitars into their, music and stuff. But this is like doing a meditative drone kind of East Indian thing without using a sitar.
Yeah.
And
it's taking the real idea, the core idea of what they're talking about, I think.
And it's different too, because here's this punk band, and then they're doing this too. So and one of the things I really like about the first Stooges album is the fact that this song is on there and it's really long, and I for myself, I think it might be the one of their masterpieces. Really, it doesn't again get talked about a lot because their identity is more wrapped up in everything else. But to me, this kind of illustrates the kind of perceptions and depth that the band had musically. It's not flashy, but like you said, Mark, it's an essence of it's getting at the real thing. And then the fact, the bonus on that is John Cale, this great cello viola player, sort of adds this other thing over the top. It just fit so perfectly. I like it better than anything he did with the Velvet Underground using it. And so it's just like, it's just really a cool thing.
Yeah, and he was bringing that sort of Tony Conrad, Lamont Young kind of influence.
Right, so he had that meditative noise drone dimension. He understood it.
Sure.
And he probably enhanced it, productive wise. But I don't think I was on that clip there, but I remember reading someplace where they turned all the lights out when they recorded it, sat in a circle, and just kind of clapped their hands and tapped, and had the guitars just droning, and Asheton played these really quiet wah-wah things, and it was they really went for it.
And I think a song like that too makes any critic, no matter how much they may have hated the rawness and the lack of musical skill that they appeared, you can't dismiss the Stooges when you hear that song. On some level, like intellectually, you have to now consider them in a way that you could have maybe easily dismissed them if they were only just doing these 3-minute punk rock
sideshow
songs.
Act, just yell and scream and wipe peanut butter on their chest on stage and stuff.
Because
there's more to it.
Because of the ideas that they're sort of bringing to the table.
Well, it's kind of surprising to me that you could get a 10-minute long song like that on, that the record label wouldn't have said, no, you're going to do that.
Again, we get back to the cover artwork. That's a new record came out when the first Doors album, and Light My Fire they did the radio version, but the long version had a really extended piece, and then the song The End was on
like
that. So to me, it falls right into that whole their version of I think.
And the end is a very like mantra, in a weird way too.
Hendrix was. I think Hendrix opened the door for.
He was in like
long
1983 Mermaid.
So I think that door was open, and again, then with Cale, Velvet Underground, they were doing long things like that too, and it just kind of was right. It was the right time to make it.
So do you think that was like because of John Cale's influence being the producer, or was Jack Holtzman from Elektra more open-minded than a lot of other guys?
Elektra record by far the most liberal major label by far. I mean, you look at even like the folk music, they had Phil Oakes, he was doing Nixon, anti-Nam. I mean, you look at the David Peel on the Lower East Side, all these just crazy things were on Elektra records. I remember back at the time, if I saw something on Elektra I didn't know, a lot of times I'd just buy it, just because I knew it would have potential of being really interesting. So. And
there are certainly, like, in a metal context, there are certainly metal labels where, for a while there, you almost buy anything that was on that label, because there's a certain craftsmanship or integrity behind what they're doing.
And Elektra was like, Tim Buckley was on there. I mean, these are some of the most experimental, progressive artists in their genres. It's a pretty interesting label.
Yeah, and then from there, they almost take the attitude of experimentation with We Will Fall, and then you sort of get into the evolution of their second record, which is Funhouse. And I mean, I guess how to approach this record that some people have called, the greatest, sort of raw rock and roll record of all time. I know Jack White from the White Stripes says it's the only record he ever needs for the rest of his. So it has
that power for sure. I mean, I can hear that in that record.
Yeah. It's definitely more amped up.
Yeah.
It's like so much more in your face.
It's their masterpiece. And we'll hear from a little bit more here from
Asheton?
Yeah, Ron.
Yeah.
He talks about Don Gallucci was the guy that produced the second album. And one of the interesting things to me about the Stooges, each album was produced by someone different. It kind of gives it a different character, each record a different character, but yet each album has that distinct Stooges sound and stamp. And the MC5 didn't get that lucky. Mm-hmm. They had bad producers. It just the Stooges, they were kind of lucky too. I mean, they were the right people. They hooked up with the right people. That means a lot. In retrospect too. And so Don Gallucci. We were talking earlier, he produced Luai Luai by the Kingsmen, which is regarded as one of the first punk songs.
Yeah.
It's not a well-recorded song.
No,
that's one of the...
It's garagey, Seattle.
But again, he that was a live in the studio recording, and he was on television, and but he was a good person to produce a record, and he wanted them to get a live sound in the studio to sound like their gig, because he knew that's what made them great. He'd seen them a lot. And so now there's that famous Rhino, I think, box set of the making of Funhouse, where you can hear zillions of takes of each song. But that's what they did. They just went in and just kept doing the songs over and over again until they got the the really great stellar version of it. So you might have 10, 20 takes of these songs, but they picked out the gems and did a really good job with that. And it's whatever they say, that cliche, captured lightning in a bottle kind of, really. It's all there. And Iggy is probably, I think, on Funhouse, what makes it so great is he's probably in his prime on that. I mean, it's just totally unbridled, the vocals. I've never heard any vocal on anything like him. And maybe a blues artist here or there or something, but that record is just it's just raw, really raw. And there's a nice variety of pieces on the record. It's the kind of record that people in the establishment, if they heard it wouldn't get airplay. It would freak people out. I mean, it's sort of like they were the people that you didn't bring home to mom, and it really showed on that record, I think. So.
Now, were there people? Was Lester Bangs almost the only one that kind of flew the flag for the Stooges in this era, or was there some sort of critical recognition of the sort of hidden genius?
No, I think he was the only. I think he got on him before anybody else, and he critically, recognized them in print before anybody else did. I think they were, again, like. My cousin went to every show. She was into them, and so I knew people that were really into it, and he, that they were kind of on the wavelength, and he was the critic that got it before anybody else, and was the right person to write about him for sure, because he was probably flying a similar flag, in his walk of life.
Sure, yeah.
And he's kind of the cutting edge writer of that generation without question for rock music, and. And again, he had Lester Bangs to me had a broad perspective. Most rock writers couldn't tell you anything about Coltrane or some of these different jazz artists and stuff. And Lester Bangs was listening to all kinds of music.
So he maybe knew where these strange ideas were coming from.
Exactly.
The Stooges were fitting in.
And he would somebody that might be able to sit down and listen to a 20s Bessie Smith song and then turn around and listen to a Pink Floyd record and be able to talk intelligently about it. And so. And I think the Stooges and the MC5, they brought this kind of, perspective in. And I really, to this day, don't think most rock bands have a very broad perspective. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very narrow. And so you take somebody like the Stooges, and even though they're kind of, making fun of themselves and, all this stuff, there's a lot underneath it. And that's what makes it live, Mm-hmm. So. What
was your reaction to this record when you heard it? Because it was so explosive.
I loved it. Yeah, I remember I played it to death when I got it. And I remember it came out, I think it was... I got Led Zeppelin 2 and The Flock, Dinosaur Swamps, and and they were all entirely different records, but they were all records I remember playing, all the time. I listened to it a ton. And when Raw Power came out, I was kind of more into blues and jazz, and I liked it. But
and plus it was the Bowie production, which was kind of neutered a little bit too.
But I still dug it. I mean, but yeah, Funhouse was really
this is where it's at.
Yeah, I loved it right away.
And so we're going to hear Asheton talk about not only the audience response to the Stooges, because at this point they're starting to play. They're developing this reputation as this this live act you had to see. Certainly there's the famous performance in 1970 from that television special where Iggy puts the peanut butter on his chest.
Yeah.
It was that, like you said, Iggy maybe in his prime before he kind of got into drugs too much.
Yeah.
And then obviously Asheton talking about the Funhouse record itself, and then we're going to hear Down on the Streets.
It should be said, mentioned too, I guess, that the Funhouse was an actual place in Ann Arbor where they would go and hang out and jam and do drugs and.
Was it like the Trans Love House for MC5 kind of, or
I don't know,
less political?
I kind of always got the impression it was almost like an abandoned house that had power, and they just would go in there and it was
squat and party.
It was a kind of a disaster area, but it was where they would go to have fun.
Cool.
Cool.
Now tell us about we're going to hear Down on the Streets and then Funhouse, the title track, which. Asheton will talk about the role that Steve Mackay, the sax player, played on it. But why these two songs? What jumps out to you?
Well, I like Down on the Street, MC5 Shakin' Street, that whole, again, this becomes kind of common banter, like to, that's where life's at, it's happening out in the streets.
So working class kind of thing.
Yeah. But it's kind of, this kind of real perspective. It isn't this idealism. It isn't, pie in the sky kind of thing, and it's just dealing with, what it's like to be out there,
Plus it kicks the whole record off too, right. Which sort of punches you in the face almost. Yeah,
it's a great groove on this one, and I think too, like from today's perspective in 2011, looking back at this. The vitality of this music is interesting to me because I think that with all the, I know we got a computer hookup here going and it's connecting a lot of people, and that's a really great thing, but people had to hook up out in the streets then.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain... You
met at the live shows, you met at record stores.
Right, there's a certain thing about that face-to-face thing and that gives it that rawness, that edge. I mean, you had to cope with people, you had to deal with other people to make a scene, make it happen.
Cool. And then we'll hear the Funhouse piece, which is a little bit more experimental with some jazz elements and things, and chat about that when we get back. So enjoy a little bit of reflection on Funhouse first from Asheton, and then Down on the Streets and Funhouse.
The Traveling Freak show. I can remember particularly one show we played in Boston with 10 years after. And imagine 10 years after and the Stooges together. Somebody made a mistake because there were those hardcore kind of boogie blues guys there. And when we opened up, when we came on, it was literally after each tune, dead silence. And so when we get dead silence, we start to like to intimidate the audience. So that would just make us more crazy. I mean, Iggy going into the audience. And back then, people really didn't come. You were pretty invisible if you were in the audience.
Right.
But man, not with us. You could wind up going right in there and getting, hey, why aren't you applauding, or just doing your show bit. And it was kind of the beginning of our what we call audience participation. You've got no choice, man. You're in this show. So that pretty much it wasn't the good old Michigan because they loved us here and we were the beloved Stooges and all the antics. People were pretty much shocked.
Right.
And it was fun. It really was boldly fun to go and I've actually seen true terror in people's faces. That they'd be so scared about making contact with the band that you could really see it in their faces. So it got to be a big deal. Anybody that's up front is pretty brave.
Right. Back in those days, I mean, it was like everybody was, was coming out of that Beatles and Rolling Stones screaming and so I imagine it was a nice shift.
Well, one of my favorites is Iggy. When he was into his spell at the end of the show of Swan dive into the audience, and usually it was a mass of people, so So they would catch him most of the time or break his fall, and nobody really ever got hurt, a little bruise or something. There was no broken bones or anything. But people got hip to it. So I can remember one show, I forgot where it was, but it was on a concrete floor with folding chairs, and when it was time for him to jump, the audience timed it just perfect. As he was midair, that section cleared out, and I saw him swan dive right into folding chairs and concrete floor. So that was fun. I actually really would be laughing sometimes so hard that I could barely play. Basically, after that album, being we were out and about, we'd play for a month or two, take a couple weeks off, but then it became time to make another album. So we had been developing new material. We pretty much, what you heard on Funhouse was our exact live show, because Electric found a new producer for us, who was Don Gallucci. And at first it didn't relate, I didn't click. Then I'm going, hey, wait a minute, that's Little Donnie from Down in the Good Times, from Swingin' Time. And we love Swingin' Time, they have all the bands on it, so it was really fun. Here he is, Little Donnie really is Little Donnie. He wound up coming to our, he's, 5'3" or something, and he wound up coming to our shows and coming to our house to listen to our material. He really researched well. He wanted to do a good job, and he said, hey, you guys, what I want to capture is, for your next album, just exactly what you're doing live. So basically, that's what we did, kind of the turnaround. Mostly when you go in a recording studio, you lay down the rhythm tracks, but we actually performed the show. I played all my leads right there, and then I went back and maybe added little bits of chording here and there, or little grace notes. But basically it captured the real set. And we also had, which I thought was really funny, is Ross Meyer, I believe that's his name, was the engineer, and he had just gotten done doing Barbra Streisand. So Barbra Streisand to the Stooges, I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah.
He was a really good engineer, and together they really worked on getting us, which I think is a good sound. The Funhouse album is a really good album.
Yeah, it's a great album.
I still enjoy it once in a while myself.
Yeah, it's a great record.
Down on the street where the faces shine, floating around on a real old mind. I see a
Where was he?
Steve Mackay had a band here in Ann Arbor called Carnal Knowledge.
Okay.
And he was kind of an Ann Arbor hero. He'd been in a bunch of bands. And we of course, John Sinclair had turned us on to like Pharoah Sanders, Archie Shepp, John Coltrane. And I love that stuff. I listen to it even today. I mean, it's one of my favorite stuff now. So we wanted, the Doors that had Touch Me, and we liked the end of that song, Touch Me, where the sax solo was going on.
Right.
So we're going, hey man, well, we know Steve, and he's one of our friends. So we worked him into the act. We brought him out to L.A., where we recorded Funhouse at the Electra Studios, and he wound up being a member of the band until he left on his own after maybe almost a year playing with us.
Uh-huh.
We'd have him come out, do that, and we added stuff for him.
Living in division in a down. Take it down. Take it down. We've been separated. We've been separated.
That was Funhouse and Down on the Streets. And before we sort of close out part one of our exploration here on the Stooges, I mean, we're going to end with LA Blues. And these songs, LA Blues and Funhouse, kind of share some commonalities in terms of, you know, a more experimental approach. What are some of your thoughts? Maybe being a jazz person who heard this and kind of was like, whoa, okay.
Well, yeah, I think the MC5 and the Stooges had that, you know, free jazz influence in their rock music. Again, I can't think of too many rock bands that have that as an influence. And then they use saxophone. Most rock saxophone sucks.
It's terrible. It's
neutered. It's like I don't want to hear it. If you hear a really good jazz sax player, you don't want to hear rock sax. and Steve Mackay, you know, it's good. I mean, he's doing it. In fact, a few years ago, he put an album out on an Italian label, and you know, it's a pretty interesting record. And so, you know, he was an interesting choice. I mean, again, the Stooges, you know, could tell the difference. You know, they didn't want, you know, they knew that, you know, like you said, a neutered player wouldn't fit the music. And so it's got that kind of unbridled noise and energy. I think, you know, LA Blues, the one we're going to hear here in a second and kind of close out with today, you know, that's just noise, you know, and you know, there's noise music and stuff nowadays, but, you know, back then, you know, this was on a rock album. It was almost like a kiss of death, you know, and this predates Lou Reed doing his Metal Machine
Heavy Metal
music,
Machine,
and all that stuff. You know, so, you know, the Stooges are, you know,
ahead of the curve again.
They're pioneers, and it's good. It's a good piece. It's not, you know, just, you know, something just to totally toss away and, you know, dismiss it. So
yeah, well, cool. Thanks, Mike. Hopefully we'll stick around for part two here and
sounds good.
Come back and get into sort of how the Stooges evolve into, I guess, the end of their career. So enjoy LA Blues from the Stooges part one, and obviously stick around for part two here in a little bit.